Okay, so we're now moving on to look at the key thinkers who have developed the ideas and the philosophy surrounding liberalism. And really, the father of liberalism is John Locke. So we can see him there on our line of key thinkers that we're going to be looking at. So we've done them chronologically. John Locke there at the very start, but we're going to move right the way through to the the 21st century with Betty Friedan. But let's start with our first two, John Locke and Mary Wollstonecraft. So a few terms here that you need to be very familiar with, which will be on the PowerPoint that's uploaded. So make sure you know all of those terms. I think you do by now. And let's talk about John Locke, the father of liberalism. So he's really key for his ideas on human nature and thus the type of state that is required, have underpinned much of a classical liberal thinking. So we look at his dates there, 1632 to 1704. You can see that he was a man born around the time of the Enlightenment. And indeed, he was a key figure in the Enlightenment era. So he rejected, as many of Enlightenment thinkers did, the whole idea of absolute monarchy, divine right ideas, or the idea that the state was God's creation. Rather, he argued that the true state would be created by people to serve mankind's interests and would only arise from the consent of those who would be governed by it. Historians, you'll notice his dates. He was around for the Glorious Revolution of 1688 in England, when Parliament basically threw out the James II, who they feared would have absolutist Catholic tendencies, and they invited William and Mary, the Protestants, to come over from Holland to rule England. And Parliament was very much in control of that procedure, and there was a parliamentary act that was signed which made sure that Parliament would always have certain powers in relation to the monarch. So it was a real stepping stone towards our democratic constitution in England. And John Locke, of course, was very much in favour of what happened during the Glorious Revolution. So he believed that we all existed, before governments, in a natural state, a state of nature in natural society. And he was quite optimistic about this state of nature. He didn't take the view of Hobbes, who we'll come to in our next ideology, conservatism, who was very pessimistic that in the state of nature we would all basically kill each other and have a horrible time. He was quite optimistic and basically pointed out that in the state of nature there were natural laws, natural liberties, natural rights. And this was a good situation, not to be given up lightly. And the only reason that you would have a government, therefore, was to improve on this situation. And why would a government improve on it? Because they would be there to actually resolve disputes and actually to protect those natural laws and rights, in particular to protect property. So a state would be more effective than individuals. And so a state, therefore, and we'll think about our mechanistic theory here, is an artificial creation for the benefit of people to improve on the current situation. But of course, and this is where we come to one of his really key ideas, the social contract theory. This would be supported by the idea that individuals could actually get rid of a bad ruler. So if we go through his thinking, individuals are rational. So rationally, we can say that actually our liberties are going to be better protected by the state, and that's that the state is our best protection against invasion, social disorder. And so we allow the state to govern, but we allow the state to govern. It's not imposed from above or by a divine right or anything else. We're doing that because it's in our best interests, and we have given consent to the state to govern, i.e. through elections. And the relationship is two-way, so it's a social contract. Individuals must obey the law once we've agreed to the government, but the state must also protect its citizens and respect natural rights and natural liberties. If it doesn't do that, it shouldn't be able to survive. So just to summarise then, the purpose of government is to protect liberty, life and property, those natural rights. And a famous quote, the great and chief end of men in putting themselves under government is the preservation of their property. And all liberals really accept Locke's notion of the social contract. But of course, that is all it's meant to do. So when we come to look at J.S. Mill, we'll come up to this idea which you've already read about called the night watchman state. So the government should really not be doing much more than protecting our rights and property. It's only got legitimacy because of the consent of the people who are acting rationally in giving the state power to protect their life, liberty and property. And people can remove that consent at any time if the social contract is broken, like at an election. And the government must only act to protect liberty and property, no more. So it's limited. So he would also have wanted a separation of power, dispersal of power, so separation between executive and legislative branches and judiciary. Very limited. He really didn't believe in democracy and political equality as we would think about it today. He probably wasn't very keen on giving women the vote. In terms of toleration, he really did not believe in extending toleration, for instance, to atheists. But his ideas basically of the social contract, basing authority on consent, make him the most important classical liberal theorist of government and society. And there's a short video that you should watch on John Locke before you complete the section in your booklet. So let's move on to Mary Wollstonecraft, going chronologically. If John Locke laid the foundations, she developed them, and very important development because she was looking at liberalism from the point of view of women as well as men. And as a result, if you look at her dates of when she lived, you can see that she was probably very much ahead of her time in advocating that women really were no less rational than men and should be entitled to those rights which John Locke had talked about. But she was living at a time, of course, when women had no rights. They lacked legal independence. When they married, their husbands took control of almost every aspect of their lives, including their property. They had no recourse if husband was violent. They couldn't get a divorce. Very difficult to pursue a career outside of the home. Mary Wollstonecraft talked about women as being slaves in a political and civil sense. Of course, they also couldn't vote. So women were deprived of individual freedom and certainly formal equality. She wrote a famous book called The Vindication of the Rights of Women, and she argued that both women and men are rational, and so the rights should be equal. They're equal in the eyes of God. Famous quote, "I do not wish women to have power over men, but over themselves." So she believed that women should be able to have careers and education and to own property. But again, it was choice. She wasn't forcing anything. She said, women should have the choice to be able to do this. And this would benefit not just women, but society as a whole. How can you have a society functioning properly where a half of the population, an entire gender, undermine the ideas of the Enlightenment? And how do you ensure that women play this equal role? Well, you need education. Obviously at that time, many women did not look as though they were rational to men because they had not had education. They were in the upper classes. They were just told to be mothers and wives and to be sort of pretty decorations. She described women as being in a gilt cage and despaired of sort of idle, vacuous women that she saw around her. But this was because, she argued, they haven't had education. Once you have education, you can develop your rational faculties. You can realise your potential. You can spot silly ideas like the divine right of kings. And then you can play an important role in discussion and argument and a full role in society, which of course will benefit to civilization and society as well. Obviously, she supported formal equality, which is, enshrining in law that sort of equality, which was obviously not in the slightest bit likely to happen during her life. But interestingly, while she was alive, American and French revolutions. Now, she supported both because of her liberal views. And obviously in America, you've got the Constitution setting out the defence of individual rights. But she was very keen to make the point that these should apply to all individuals and not men. Now, in France at the beginning, and historians, I'm sure you know this, right at the start, there was huge optimism by women in France and outside of France, with people like Mary, who really thought the French Revolution had nailed it on this front. The French Revolution were calling people citizens. Right at the start, in that sort of fervent excitement of the French Revolution, there was a lot of talk about women's rights as well as men's rights, women's groups set up. There were some really prominent women who played a key role in the discussions and the debates that were going on during this time. And so Mary went to France to take part in this sort of fevered excitement that was going on, as did other people like Tom Paine, who was another important political writer, who also went along to France at this time, because they wanted to be part of it. And as you know, historians, of course, this doesn't last. And as the sort of the revolution goes sort of bad and the terror comes in, and you've got the Jacobin clubs becoming more powerful, and Robespierre being supported by the Jacobins, and the terror starts. Actually, any idea of women's rights, a lot of people's rights go out the window, and certainly women's rights go out of the window. Indeed, Mary herself fell under suspicion and was lucky not to be arrested during the terror. Thomas Paine did get arrested, and it was only by a fluke of history that he actually didn't get executed. Interestingly, as well, she lived a life that was quite scandalous by the standards of the day. While she was in France, she had an affair with an American who was also there because of the excitement of the revolution. She had a child, and that affair did not last, so she wasn't actually married. She went back to England eventually, totally disillusioned with the French Revolution, where she did get married, and she had another child, but sadly died after 10 days after giving birth for a second time. That child was Mary Shelley, who you might know about, English literature students, with Frankenstein, who wrote Frankenstein. So her daughter went on to be famous as well. So really interesting woman, really going against a lot of the attitudes and ideas of the time. So again, another little video for you to watch on Mary. There's more information in the booklet, and a bit for you to fill in there on her ideas and to really summarise why she was a key liberal thinker. Okay, good luck with that piece of work.